Hey, Patrick here, and I want to talk about CyberUiActionsPanelComponent. This is a new component that's been released today in CyberUI version 0.3, which I just released. ActionsPanelComponent is a component for showing actions related to a task. So if you have a task management system, and CyberUI wants to help you build task management systems, you'll be shown some kind of task by the system, and somehow you tell the system some kind of response to being shown the task. Maybe you say, okay, I got it done, so give me the next one. Maybe you say, I'm not the right person for this task, defer it to or delegate it to somebody else. Or maybe you'll say, something kind of went wrong with your system because this task you're showing me is not the thing I want to do right now, so why don't you just snooze it and get it off my list for now and maybe show it to me some other time. Those are actions, as in my model of task management. So the task management system both gives you a task suggestion, but it also gives you some preset actions you can take in response to being shown the task. And up until now, in my private task management app, which I built and am slowly moving a lot of pieces to CyberUI from, I was showing a list of actions. At first it was pretty carefully curated. So it was stuff like mark, complete, edit, and I also had actions like cancel the task or delete the task. So cancel would just mark it as don't ever suggest it to me again. Delete would actually remove it from the back end. Point being, I had a pretty small, carefully curated list of actions. But as I was thinking about it, I thought that the model I'd actually like to use for actions, for tasks, is actually more of a conversation or a dialogue between the task management system and the user. And so I don't want to constrain the user to only being able to choose one of a small number of actions or responses. In the long term, I'd really like to be able to have the user interact with the task management system through natural language, for example. But in terms of where we go from here with CyberUI, in the near future, I don't expect to be able to handle arbitrary natural language interactions for a while, but keeping in mind the sort of long-term vision of having task management be this interaction, this conversation between the system and the user, that kind of shapes how I think about this. So as I see it, the task management system suggests the task, and it has the opportunity to suggest some possible actions the user can take in response to the task. And by the way, when I say task, the thing I'm pointing at that's sort of central to being a task is the ability to do it in one sitting and have it be sort of fairly straightforward. Like if you're being shown a task and it's not super easy to figure out what's the thing you're actually supposed to be doing, or it seems maybe too broad or abstract, or it's like not the sort of thing you could get done in a single sitting, then maybe that's more of a project than a task, and I'd come up with a separate workflow for that. So just to summarize, the model is system shows task to user. System also shows some actions the user can take to the user. And the user takes one of those actions, or at some point in the future, the user can just converse with the system. So the problem I started to get into with my app, which was using these curated actions, is that I started just keep adding more and more actions. So once I got the date picker stuff working on snoozing, then I said, okay, well, you can snooze to tomorrow, that's an action. Or you can snooze to an arbitrary date, that's an action, and it brings up a date picker, and you pick the date, and the task gets snoozed. Then, for delegation, maybe there's a delegate to action that brings up a list of things, people, or services you can delegate to. And basically the list kept growing and growing. And I was hesitant to curate it because I thought to myself, well, maybe if you think about it as a conversation, we really want to be able to support a broad range of possible responses to the user being shown a task. So in a way, I thought I didn't want to remove functionality. Like once I'd implemented an action, I didn't want to remove it. So CyberUI Actions Panel component is my attempt at a solution to this general sort of problem. And it actually came up while I was thinking about the idea of task refinement. So, like I said a minute ago, I think to be a good task, it should be something you can complete in a single sitting. It should be something where the next action that you have to take is fairly obvious or straightforward. And it should be something where you'll know when it's done. It has concrete completion criteria that are easy to understand. But unfortunately, if you're like me, sometimes you add things to your to-do list that don't meet all of those criteria. And you might not realize it when you enter it. But then when you're shown it later on as the top task suggestion, you think, oh, like that's really hard, or that's not the high priority thing, or I need to unpack this into multiple tasks. Or in the worst case, sometimes I just get this like flail response when I see the task statement, and I just think, oh, how am I going to get this done? Like, it's just too hard. So I was thinking about how to solve that problem, and I termed the problem task refinement. The thought is basically that when you're being shown tasks as a user, you may object to being shown a task, and for a variety of reasons. The completion criteria are non-existent or vague. There's no immediate next action that's clear to take, or maybe you're just too tired to work on it right now, or based on the constraints of your current context, like you only have 15 minutes to get something done, but the next action is going to take an hour. It just doesn't make sense. So I started developing a system for task refinement, or a proposal for how to do task refinement, because it seems like an important thing to do. Heaven forbid we start trying to use our task management system and like having all these aversive reactions to these overly complex, hairy tasks. Like that's not just thinking about humans as agents in a reinforcement learning environment. If every time you go to your task manager, you're like, oh, I don't want to do that one. Oh, this one's too hard. Like that's a bad recipe for having a successful task management app. So a task management app actually should provide some way for you to refine those tasks, or at least that's the idea. And I started working on a proposal for that. But as part of that, I started thinking, okay, let me say where we're going with this. The three actions I think, well, CyberUiActionsPanelComponent will show the top three actions that you give it, and then it fairly prominently. And then it adds, if you have more than three actions that you give it, it puts a more drop down that opens up a menu and puts the rest of the actions there. And I think that's a pretty neat idea because it solves a lot of problems. It lets you have as many actions as you want. So as we work again towards the more conversational model, we can continue adding support for more and more actions or responses from the user. But at the same time, it sort of guides the user to these like top three or so suggested actions. So the three actions that I came up with that I'm interested in exploring further as like fairly typically good suggestions, I think, are mark complete, snooze, and delegate. Actually, the order I go with is mark complete, delegate, and snooze. So I've updated the CyberUI demo to the example tasks in the demo to follow that pattern. So why did I pick those three? Mark complete is basically the way that you tell the task management system that you've done the task. That has to happen somehow. How better than a mark complete button? And if we're gamifying it, then what I'd like to have is an achievement thing that pops up. It's like, yay, you got the task done. But somehow you've got to tell the task management system you got the task done. So mark complete's pretty straightforward. Delegate, I think is pretty important, and I think a lot of task management systems leave it out right now. But basically, there's stuff on your to-do list, but you don't always have to be the one to do it. Sometimes you'd rather delegate it to someone else, even if it means paying them to do it for you. So I think delegation is actually a pretty central use case. It's definitely one I'm interested in supporting in CyberUI. And so I think delegate is another important action that should be prominently shown to the user. The third one is snooze. And so at first, when I implemented snooze button in my app and CyberUI, I thought that basically snooze is kind of like a stopgap, short-term band-aid thing to get around the problem of the task management system being imperfect, right? So maybe it suggests to you a task, and you're like, no, something's wrong. That's not the top task. I don't want to work on that right now. And so snoozing is basically a way to tell the system, hey, you messed up. don't show me that task for a while because it's not the right suggestion. So I'd kind of set snoozing aside, though, as I started to think about task refinement, because snoozing is a signal to the task management system. You're telling it that something's gone wrong, but you're not really telling it what. And so there's not a clear course of action that the system can take to remedy the problem. So the very simplest approach with snoozing is just that when you snooze it, it goes away and then it comes back later. And that works sometimes, but it doesn't work for... I guess it works when it's your state that's the thing that's like your emotional state or your mental clarity, it's that kind of thing. If that kind of thing, maybe you're really tired for the night, and so you don't want to work on the harder tasks, and you snooze them. And then in the future day, when you have more energy, you work on them. Snoozing in the simplest model can work for that kind of thing, but it doesn't really work if the task is overly broad, or it's missing, concrete completion criteria, or any of those other things I mentioned earlier. So what you need to do in that case, at first I was thinking, would be to come up with a separate mechanism for giving feedback to the task management system about why you're objecting essentially to being shown the task. But after a little bit of work today, I thought it's actually possible to combine this task refinement proposal that I was coming up with the snooze button, and just augment the snooze button to elicit your reason for snoozing some of the time afterwards. So you press the snooze button, and at its discretion, the task management system will ask you, hey, notice you snoozed this, or maybe you've snoozed it a couple times. Why are you snoozing this task? And it can give you some preset options, such as the task seems too hard, or I don't have the time to work on it right now, or it's the next action is not clear, or there's not completion criteria that are easily understandable. Things like that. So that was a cool insight. I think feel like I've made progress on task refinement today by realizing that we don't necessarily need to come up with a whole separate system for objecting to being shown tasks. The snooze button can be that signal, and to the extent that we need some more nuance there, some of the time after snoozing a task, we can follow up with a reason collection dialogue that elicits the reason that the user snoozed. And then the system can take that signal and do something with it. So if, for example, the task is too vague, then we can put the system, and the user says that to the system, then the system can put it in a special queue of vague tasks that need to be refined, and then the system can show a separate task to the user, which is of the form, make this task less vague, or something like that. And that task is hopefully simpler. The task of refining the task by making it less vague is hopefully simpler than the task of doing the vague version of the task. And so in that sense, you can get this sort of progress over time and get rid of the uggy, negative emotion tasks that are like hard and overwhelming and causing that flail response. Anyway, all of that is to say that CyberUiActionsPanelComponent is the component that I've created in CyberUI to have this functionality of showing the top 3 actions and then an overflow menu with the remaining actions. It's more configurable than the Angular material accordion actions directive or component, because it lets you give a color hint and an icon hint, basically saying when the task management system is associating a certain color or icon with an action, CyberUiActionsPanel will use that color and will use that icon. And the component also looks at the prominence of each action. If you've given an action a prominence value, it'll size the button accordingly, and that uses the flex grow attribute. So the action panel uses Flexbox behind the scenes. Anyway, that component is now available in CyberUI version 0.3, which 0.3.0, which was released just a few minutes ago, and so I thought I'd make a video to kind of explain the thought process behind it, and that's this video. So thanks for watching, and I'd be curious if you have feedback. You can put a comment in the video below. You can put a comment below if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also contact me on my website. That's pshields.net/contact, and that'll get to my email eventually. And CyberUI is my way that I'm trying to, contribute to the public good. I'm releasing this all as open source with the hope that people will take it and use it and get value from it. But I'm still trying to make a living while doing it. So if you want to sponsor CyberUI, check out my Patreon page, or use that contact form on my website, and we'll chat. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.